I am a basic bitch who loves Madeline Miller. It was just so amazing that I cried, which is kind of pathetic. Completely shocked, A, that a teenage boy could read, and the next thing you know, you're crying about those rabbits. Hello, my name is Erin, and I've been making a lot of book-related videos because I love reading. I have been reading since I was a little kid. I was born a bookworm, so I thought I would do a little top favorite books of all time because I feel like you can tell a lot about a person by which books they hold dear to their heart. And in case you've never seen one of my videos before, I'm Erin, like I already said. I'm 24 years old, I live in New England, and I work as an analytical chemist. So I'm a scientist, but I love to read and I love baking and knitting, and basically I'm a 90-year-old grandma in the body of a 24-year-old girl. So let's get straight into it, and these are in no particular order. I'm not ranking them. I'm just gonna grab whatever I feel like off the top of my head. We're going to start with a favorite author of mine, and that is Neil Gaiman, particularly The Ocean at the End of the Lane. This I read maybe 10 years ago the first time, and I've loved it ever since. Neil Gaiman just has this way of writing. He is such an incredible wordsmith, and I could only dream of having a drop of the talent he does in terms of his prose. I do love all of his books, from American Gods to Neverwhere to The Graveyard Book. In fact, my senior year quote in high school was from The Graveyard Book, but my favorite is The Ocean at the End of the Lane, and I actually have a special edition signed copy with a signed book plate. If that will focus, probably not, but that is how much I adore this book. I don't want to say too much about this book because it is quite short, and it is a mysterious, whimsical kind of story where it's best going in not knowing too much. But essentially, at the very beginning, we follow a man who is returning to his hometown for a funeral, and he is drawn to this house at the end of the lane where he meets a little girl, her mother, and her grandmother, and he starts to remember things from his childhood he had long forgotten about. It is, like I said, kind of whimsical and adventurous, but it is also dark and sinister and talks about monsters and what makes a monster. It is such an amazing, poetic story that I honestly think almost everybody would enjoy. Next up, we have to talk about Brandon Sanderson. I could not make a video about my favorite books without mentioning him. I am holding up two of his series right now. The Mistborn series, the first one is The Final Empire, and then we have The Way of Kings, which, yes, is over 1,000 pages and very heavy, so I'm putting this down. I think basically every fantasy reader should read Brandon Sanderson. He is a master at world building, and every one of his worlds has such unique, realistic, magical characteristics and magic systems. In fact, I have never read a Brandon Sanderson book I have not enjoyed, although I haven't read all of them quite yet. I would definitely start with the Mistborn trilogy because I feel like it's just the most approachable, and you know, it's a trilogy, it's pretty easy to get into, and it's the first one I read. The Mistborn trilogy starts with the question, what if the hero failed and the villain won? What would that fantasy world look like? In this first book, the kingdom is ruled by the Lord Ruler, who is both a god and a man. People aren't really sure, but he rules this kingdom with an iron fist. But there might be an uprising coming in this novel. The magic system in this book is called allomancy, and it is obtaining magical powers through ingesting different metals. So some people have an affinity for one type of metal and they'll get one type of power from that. For example, some of them are being extremely strong, being able to have heightened senses, having the ability to affect like pull or push on metals. But there are also people called Mistborns who are able to use all of the metals, and it's just incredibly unique, incredibly amazing. I think a must-read for every fantasy reader, especially this first book. I am not a book crier, and I cried while reading this book, not because anything so incredibly sad happened. It was just so amazing that I cried, which is kind of pathetic. But now Brandon Sanderson's ongoing series is called The Way of Kings. This is the first book, and I only just read this first book a few months ago, and it has already become a firm favorite of mine. This is an incredible, perfect book, and I love how floppy these big paperbacks are. I haven't even read the rest of the series, but I'm so confident that I'm going to love them that I'm adding this to my favorites list. And you know what? Even if I didn't like the rest of the series, this one was so amazing, 5 out of 5 stars, that it would still be a favorite of mine. This book is very difficult to describe because obviously there is a lot going on, but we follow 4 main characters. One is a surgeon turned soldier turned slave at the beginning of the book. We also follow a prince and warlord who is having visions of the past, of a time about a millennia before the start of the book, where these knights called the Knights Radiant roamed and defended. We also follow a woman who's trying to become a scholar, but she's actually there to steal something. And we follow an assassin who may or may not have started a war. This is about as epic fantasy can get. I know this is incredibly intimidating because of its size, but if you're scared, it is split up into different sections, so you could just take them one at a time, taking a break between each, and that way it might seem a little bit more approachable. But honestly, if you're like me, you'll just get so sucked into the story and the characters anyway that you won't be able to put it down. Listen, we can already tell I'm a nerd. I love fantasy books, I love reading, but I'm gonna get nerdier. I love classical literature, mythology, history, as in ancient Greece, ancient Rome. I minored in classical studies in college. I was very close to double majoring, but I didn't because I didn't know what I was going to do with that second major. I knew I was going into the chemistry field. But all that to say, I am a basic bitch who loves Madeline Miller. She's the one who wrote Circe and The Song of Achilles. These are Greek mythological retellings, Circe of course being from the point of view of Circe. She is a sorceress who pops up in a few different Greek myths, particularly in the Odyssey. And then The Song of Achilles is told from Patroclus's point of view, and it is the story of him and his relationship and life with Achilles as they go and fight in the Trojan War. If I had to choose, I'd probably say The Song of Achilles is my favorite of the two, but they are both absolutely amazing novels, and they are, very different stories. Madeline Miller, I think, does an incredible job of making these well-known and well-read myths kind of her own story while still staying true to that original tale and history. I've read the Iliad a bunch of times. I know the story of the Trojan War, of Achilles and Patroclus, but this book did not fail to make me cry. And again, I am not a book crier. I'm not a crier. I don't. I've cried in one movie my entire life, but this book will make you violently sob, even if you know the ending before, which if you've read the Iliad, you'll know. It doesn't matter because it is that emotional. She takes this, like I said, well-known story and she puts a lot of heart into it. I know this is super popular on TikTok, and I would say it's popular for a reason. And if you haven't read either of these and you're kind of intrigued by Greek mythology or the stories, give them a shot. All right, time to talk about the most underrated book series of all time. It genuinely makes me upset that this book and its series doesn't get as much love as it honestly deserves. This book is actually the reason that my boyfriend and I started dating in high school, because he had read it and I was completely shocked, A, that a teenage boy could read.
Reading.
Reading? Mm-hmm. I didn't know you could read.
And would do so willingly, and had read such an amazing book that, like I said, pretty much no one my age really seemed to even know about. And that is The Book of Three by Lloyd Alexander, specifically just this series, The Prydain Chronicles. Now, Disney did make a terrible adaptation of this in the 80s called The Black Cauldron. If you saw that, do not let that color your idea of this series, because that was truly awful. This series is 100 times better than whatever that movie was. It is a 5-book middle grade series that was sort of the Harry Potter for my parents' generation, which is how I even knew about and read it, because this was my dad's copy and it was coming out in the 60s when my dad was born. So basically the only people I know who have read this are people above the age of 50. I don't know why it hasn't stood the test of time in the way that Harry Potter has or Lord of the Rings, because in my opinion, this is better than both of those series. It is an incredible, touching, epic 5-book middle grade fantasy series. It is a well-written, concise, epic tale of friendship, love, heroism, and a pig with oracle abilities. So basically our main character is Taryn. He is an orphan and an assistant pig keeper for a sorcerer. And this pig, like I said, is an oracular pig. So one day when she escapes, Taryn has to go off on a quest and find her because she cannot fall into the wrong hands. And there is an evil rising in the kingdom of Prydain. So it's this, like I said, epic tale, and he meets all of these characters that become his friends along the way. It is so freaking good. I would say the best books, my personal favorites, are the 4th and 5th. So that's Taryn, Wanderer, and the High King. Another book I cried in was that last book because it had such an amazing, touching ending. It isn't very long. The books are maybe 200 to 300 pages each, and a lot of them won Newbery Awards back in the day. If you take anything away from this video, it is, please, dear God, read this series. I know it just sounds like some random children's fantasy book from the 60s, but it is so much more than that. And speaking of middle grade books, I just had to mention Percy Jackson. I, like basically every Gen Zer, grew up reading this series and absolutely loving it. I was very into Harry Potter as a kid, and while I do have a lot of nostalgic love for that series, Percy Jackson is the one that really stood the test of time for me. I've reread this as an adult, and I think it is just as witty, unique, and fun as it was the first time when I was like 9 years old. I'm not gonna say what it's about because if you don't know, you've been living under a rock. I'd be shocked if you haven't read this, and if you haven't, no matter your age, just give it a shot. It is truly an amazing, fun, action-packed series with the most incredible cast of characters. Alrighty, we're back with another adult fantasy, and that is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This is the first book in the Winter Night trilogy, and I absolutely love this series, and I love Catherine Arden as an author. This book is a very lyrical, whimsical, dark fairy tale story, and it is a little bit slow. I have heard some people think that, but for me, I was so invested and immersed in this world and in Vasilisa's story that for me, I didn't really think it was slow. This involves a lot of old Russian folklore, spirits, and gods at the time when Christianity was overtaking Russia. Vasilisa's new stepmother is one of the Christian converts who brings a priest into her small hometown, but rejecting the old ways can be quite dangerous, and the things in the forest are not happy about this. Dark, evil things begin to stir, and Vasilisa is one of the only ones who can see them and potentially stop them. Now Vasilisa must defy her family, her village, and their newfound beliefs in order to save everyone. This is another trilogy I really need to reread because I absolutely adored it. I even took a Russian folklore class in college because of this, which I really enjoyed, and this was pretty accurate, by the way, from what I, got from one class, but I thought this was such an amazing fantasy world, but also such an interesting historical reflection on Christianity essentially erasing old pagan beliefs and traditions. And like every other person on book social media, I absolutely love Vicious by V.E. Schwab. I have read this a few times by now, and it still remains a firm favorite of mine. In general, I just love all of V.E. Schwab's works, especially The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, but this one just takes the cake for me. It's about these two college roommates named Victor and Eli who want to be scientists, and particularly prove by experimenting on themselves how people in this world get supernatural abilities. But of course things go horribly wrong. Victor ends up in prison, and this book starts with him getting out on a quest for revenge against Eli. This is a wicked, sharp story about ambition, jealousy, and vengeance, following our morally gray anti-hero, Victor. And of course, it's all wrapped up in a neat little bow by its sinister sci-fi plot. Everyone loves this book, I think for good reason. It is V.E. Schwab at her best. It is one of those stories that you're going to pick up and devour. You're not going to be able to put this down. It is absolutely captivating. Even if you're someone who doesn't really like superhero type abilities or stories, just trust me, this is amazing. Now next up is a very different one, and that is Watership Down by Richard Adams. This is a classic which, yes, is about rabbits, which might sound absolutely stupid and insane to you, but just trust me, this is an amazing, amazing tale of adventure, heroism, and friendship. Like, it doesn't matter that our characters are rabbits, okay? Like, just, that's not the point. It is just such an amazing, well-written story. And yes, it is about a warren of rabbits that is destroyed by humans, and so they have to escape and try to find a new home, which I know sounds like a children's story. It's not a children's story. It is so much more than what you see at face value. This is a tale of survival, of the destruction of nature and the brutality of man. One second you think you're reading a little book about rabbits traveling through the English countryside, and the next thing you know, you're crying about those rabbits, and it is so much more than what you thought going in. Probably thinking, why am I trying to sell you on a book about rabbits? But this is literary fiction, I promise, I promise. And I did say I was a basic bitch, right? Yep. I love Six of Crows, just like every girl out there. This series is so good. I love Leigh Bardugo. But basically, this is a heist story following morally gray criminals, but set in a fantasy world with Grisha, which are magical people who are able to control different things like elements or the human body or materials. It is super fascinating, but honestly what will really get you is the action-packed plot, the betrayal, the vengeance, the endearing characters who may be doing the right thing but for all the wrong reasons. Such a good series. It's only 2 books. Just read it if you haven't yet. Okay, so I have 3 left, and 2 of them are mysteries. I grew up reading Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie. So my favorite Agatha Christie is And Then There Were None. This, I don't want to say much about. It is a mystery, but essentially we have a group of strangers who are all invited to this mysterious island, reasons unknown, and they get picked off one by one. It is such a riveting, captivating tale, and I love Agatha Christie. I have a whole collection of special editions. She's amazing. And then my favorite sort of modern day mystery is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. Everyone talks about Gone Girl, and while I do enjoy that, I don't think it holds a candle to Sharp Objects. This was also a mini-series on, I don't even know, Hulu, starring Amy Adams. It was amazing, but this is following a reporter who has to return to her hometown to report on these young girls who are getting killed there. And it is a dark, dark story. It deals a lot with mental illness and of course murder. So honestly, there are a lot of trigger warnings for this book. I recommend looking them up before you start, but it is shocking. It is, I don't want to say the word captivating again because I feel like I've said that too many times, but it is truly an amazing psychological thriller that will have you on the edge of your seat. And the last one I don't have a physical copy of because I read my dad's when I was still living at home, but it is Rules of Civility by Amor Towles. This is a literary fiction novel set in the 1930s. It's actually set from New Year's Eve and then throughout the year following our character Katie as she has a chance encounter with a guy in the upper class of New York City and how this sort of changes her life. It's a really difficult to describe kind of story. On the surface, this plot doesn't sound particularly exciting, but there's something about just the way it's explored, both the characters, their motivations, the city itself, that transforms this little story and becomes magical. This book is special, I think, because it just captures this moment in time in somebody's life so viscerally and in such a beautifully written way. Also, obviously, it explores some interesting themes of class and also just human identity. It really reminds me of the song The Stranger by Billy Joel.
Then I felt the stranger kick me right between the eyes.
You know, you're putting on all these masks, all these personas, and is there someone behind that? Is that person the real you, or is it the mask you put on? Maybe it's somewhere in between. Okay, and I could keep going on and on all day about all the books I love, but that is too many already, so I'm gonna stop there. I want to hear what everyone's thoughts are, not only on the books I mentioned, but on books that you love, because I would love to add 1,000,000 more books to my list to read, as if it isn't long enough to begin with. But yeah, that is it, and I will see you next time. Thank you for watching.